We're going to be talking about the Woodcraft Folk. I'm not sure if many people know about them on the call, but I'm sure they will after this discussion. So I'm just going to play this short video.
Woodcraft!
Who are these folk all dressed in green? We are Woodcraft Folk, and we have been going for over 90 years.
It was entirely established by the young people themselves. I got together a group of young friends, and we met sitting on kitchen chairs in my mother's back garden, and we discussed, as it were, the setting up of a training group for leaders of future groups. Because there wasn't one of us at that meeting in my back garden who was over 21. We were part of a quite significant agitation among young people at the end of the First World War. Our brothers and fathers, many of them had been killed, so we were, as it were, the survivors, and we were now deeply troubled as a generation.
The first grants were small, like this one for £5 for camping equipment, but Leslie and the group persisted. And after a while, we were getting more help from larger sources.
Support came from the Cooperative Union and many trade union bodies.
And soon we were off camping. So from humble beginnings and big aspirations, that was the start of the Woodcraft Folk. We grew, from a few guys in a back garden to hundreds of groups across the country. Jump forward to 1968. It's the height of the Cold War between the East and West, with the constant threat of real war breaking out. By now, the Woodcraft Folk is an international cooperative youth organisation.
Here, in one small part of just one country, have come together boys and girls from all over the world. The frontiers and divisions that keep their parents apart, the walls which grown-ups build against themselves, do not exist here. Why are they here? What do they stand for? Just simply for the good of the human race, of which they are its next generation.
And declare it's the family of man, keeps growing the family of man, keeps sowing the seeds of a new life every day.
And what is their creed? Span the world with friendship.
Michael Williams, you're the district coordinator for Highgate and Holloway Woodcraft Folk. Can you tell us a bit more about the history of the Woodcraft Folk?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're an educational movement for children and young people of all ages. We're about giving kids a place, I mean, first and foremost, to have fun. There's lots of sort of levels of what I can talk about, but it's worth really emphasizing. It's really good fun because it is about children and they want to play games and they want to relax and socialize with each other. But we also offer kids a place to kind of explore big ideas with their peers and sort of talk about how the world works and sort of grow their understanding. On the sort of rare occasion when someone in the newspaper writes about us, they generally always use the same description, which is the socialist alternative to the Scouts, which is it's not the worst description in the world, but I don't feel it's super accurate. I'd borrow the line from Tony Benn about the Labour Party, which was, it's not a socialist organisation, but there's a lot of socialists in it. And if you want to understand the Woodcraft, you do need to understand the history of the Scouts. So Scouts were set up at the beginning of the 20th century. It was a runaway success overnight. And lots of people got involved because why wouldn't you want to go with your mates out into the countryside and have fun? But for the kind of people who were sponsoring the Scouts, the kind of members of the establishment patronizing it, it was kind of born out of a bit of a moral panic about the youth of the day. There was a fear with this increasingly urbanized, industrialized society and all these working class lads growing up in slum housing. There was this fear that they wouldn't be fit enough to shoulder a rifle and defend the empire. So the Scouts was kind of about taking those young people out into the countryside and giving them that vigorous outdoor kind of training. And also not just physically, but kind of mentally inoculating them against the threat of socialism and all these scary ideas. And then, as the video there suggested, after the First World War, you had a whole generation of young adults who had grown up in the Scouts, who loved the Scouts, loved the camping, loved the camaraderie, but felt it no longer represented their values.
Right.
And so there was a sort of slew of splinter groups that split from the Scouts. There was the Peace Scouts, there was the Kibbo Kith, there was the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry, all these interesting sort of groups of the interwar period. Now, most of them then fell by the wayside, but Woodcraft is one of those groups that survived and grew and continued to change and evolve over the subsequent years. And we're coming up to our centenary, so 2025 will be 100 years of folk. And yeah, so those values, what are those values? It's about peace and cooperation. We've got a long history of support with and involvement with the cooperative movement. It's about internationalism. We've always done these camps with just people from all over the world. It's all about bringing young people together regardless of borders. We only exist in the UK, but we have lots of affiliated organizations in other countries that we camp with. Just this last summer, we camped, there was 2,500 of us in Northampton from about 45 odd countries. So I was bringing my lot from North London. There was guys from Czech Republic and Slovenia. And I will point out that our groups from the delegations we were supposed to have from Cameroon and Palestine didn't get their visas, whereas the groups from Czech Republic and Slovenia did, go figure. And also, sorry, from day one, we've been very egalitarian. So it's always been mixed boys and girls. It's always been non-denominational. It's always been, for example, a place where Quakers and Methodists and Jewish people have always felt like this is a place for them. It's never been that kind of king and country and Anglican church thing that the Scouts was back in the day. And I will say, I'm not just coming on a Zoom to slag off the Scouts. I mean, they're much more sort of progressive and open, I think, than they used to be. But Woodcraft Folk has always been this home for kind of alternative ideas around sort of youth groups.
Right.
I was also going to talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
Jeremy, what would you like to add about the history of the Woodcraft Folk?
Well, very similar to Michael. These Scouts were formed by Baden-Powell in 1907 in response to the falling physique of many working class people because of poverty and hunger, and the army reforms that brought in, particularly after the Boer War, when the physique was seriously challenged. And so there was that sort of military impetus behind it. And Michael's quite right. The Scouts have changed massively since then, and they're very, very different. Indeed, I was in the Scouts as a child. I enjoyed the Cubs more than the Scouts, actually, and I got slightly bored with some of the stuff that was pushed out in the Scouts. But my own children were in Woodcraft Folk, and I've been on many Woodcraft Folk camps with Michael when he was much younger and didn't even have a beard. In fact, he couldn't grow one at that time. And I found them absolutely fascinating because of the global nature of it and because of the sort of sustainability that was with it. When we had the camp at Newark, the anniversary camp, it was fantastic, and the slogan behind it was sustainable. It's kind of a bit weird, but it worked well at that camp. We had hundreds and hundreds of young people there from all over the world at that international camp. I also went to an international camp in Finland, which was sort of magical. Midsummer in a forest in Finland, swimming at midnight in daylight in the lakes. It was just an amazing experience. And what I noticed with the Woodcraft camps were the sense of democracy surrounding them, where everything is around a circle where all the young people contribute to it. That's important. But it's also interesting that particularly the younger ones who go to the same primary school or same secondary school have different perceptions of each other in school. So-and-so's dead brainy, he's good at maths, he's good at science, he's good at art, or whatever it happens to be. And then they get to a camp and the skill sets required are all very, very different. He's really good at putting up tents. He's great at making fires. He's fantastic at map reading. He's great at organizing games. He's great at cooking, or she's wonderful at leading people. And so it's that sort of sense of participation which is so good. And I've got very happy memories of taking a group out in Wareham in Dorset, where we had this blindfold map reading exercise where you take 6 or 7 children blindfolded in a bus, a minibus, and drop them and one adult off, and you then take the blindfold off, give them a map and a compass, and say, find your way back to the camp. And the responsible adult, is not allowed to tell them to help them in any way other than to prevent them falling into danger. And I suppose if the thing went on for too long, you'd eventually get fed up with it and read the map yourself and take them back. But it was an interesting exercise where these children, I just remember them, it was a beautiful moment. They're standing by this stream in a wood, just staring at the stream and the bridge and saying, well, how do we know where we are? And I just said, look around you. So they started looking around, and they started finding places where they could make themselves aware of where they were, and then read the map and get back that way. Fantastic.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Now, Michael, can you tell us what the situation is with the Woodcraft Folk now? Are more people signing up to be members? What's the situation?
So we've always been sort of relatively niche. We haven't had the sort of scale of mass membership that groups like the Scouts have had. We've got sort of 10 to 15,000 members nationally. COVID had an impact, certainly quite a few groups closed. We've got a couple of thousand adult volunteers who run the groups and organize the camps. And we have a staff in head office of like half a dozen people. That's it. So it's important to understand about the Woodcraft is it's driven by the passion and enthusiasm of the people who volunteer. And I wouldn't actually describe myself first and foremost as a volunteer. I'm a member. So the idea is everyone is part of that community, and everyone contributes in the way in which they're able. Now, the challenge, of course, is always, first and foremost, I think, getting people in and getting people involved. And historically, the Woodcraft has been much stronger in London and the Southeast, but we've done some really good work opening up groups in the Northeast recently. There are always finance questions, but I think, we own a very small number of sites, but not a huge amount of resources. But I think it doesn't, most of the time, I don't think it comes down to finance. It comes down to having those kind of networks in our communities and having people we can lean on. And to give you an example as a district coordinator, there are people who were involved in Woodcraft in my local area 20 years ago when their kids were young, who I know I can call up when I'm organizing an event and I need their input. And they're not volunteering every week, but they're there and they're a supporter and they're a part of our community. And having that sort of wider network is incredibly important, I think, to helping groups grow and thrive.
Can you tell people how we can get involved with the Woodcraft Folk?
So if you go to Woodcraft Folk website, woodcraft.org.uk, and you go to find your local group, you just type in your postcode and it will point you to the contact details of whoever your local group are. And if I could kind of make a pitch to get involved, I mean, I'd love kids to get involved. You know, if you've got kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, etc., but also adults as well. And I think my pitch would be, ask yourself when in your everyday life you experience democracy. So, most people, every couple of years, you go to the ballot box and that's it, right? You don't really tend to get at work or when you go to shopping or involved in hobbies. However, the few areas we do actually get to participate in democracy, like being in a trade union, being in a political party, etc., why do we assume that adults just have the skill set to be able to do that properly? That is just like everything else you learn when you're growing up. It's a skill set that needs to be taught to young people. And my argument for Woodcraft Folk, above all else, would be we need young people to be able to belong to a democratic community where they can learn skills like be brave and speak up, but also be willing to listen when someone else is speaking up. how do you do things like resolutions, and how do you elect post holders, and how do you ensure consensus decision making happens? And I think that's what Woodcraft is. Its value more than anything else is about teaching, socializing young people into being able to belong to communities and contribute to communities, so that when they grow up, they can go off and be involved in other campaigns as well.
Right, that's interesting. Jeremy, did you want to add something else to that?
Just a last word, if I could. I absolutely support everything Michael said. Everyone on this call has got strengths, skills, abilities, probably not very much time, but you can always make time. A very wise person once said to me, if you want something done, ask a busy person, because they know how to organize their time and their energy to do something. Now, Woodcraft is fantastic because it gives the children concerned a sense of belonging, self-worth, and participatory democracy. I see lots of questions in the chat. The answer is yes to nearly all of them. You can take the young people anywhere. You can make visits to places. We once took two of our local Woodcraft groups to Parliament, and they had a chat with Tony Benn and me about democracy and the nature of democracy and history. It only lasted an hour, but it could have gone on for hours and hours. And Tony said afterwards, that was the most intelligent questioning I've had for a very long time from a group of inspiring young people. And so it is about environmentalism, it is about sustainability, but above all, it's anti-racist and respect. And Woodcraft have done a lot to help children from the Western Sahara, from the refugee camps there, to be able to try and come to international camp. I've had to intervene a few times to try and make sure they got visas and things like that. And we've done the same with other groups for international camps. And so the anniversary on 2025 is a great thing to build up to. So all of you on this call, get in touch with Woodcraft, see what you can do to help, and see if you can set up a local group. And when I saw a message there saying there doesn't seem to be anything in my area, well, maybe there isn't. Maybe that's an opportunity to form one. It doesn't have to be a big group. You can start off with quite a small group. Half a dozen young people is enough to begin a group, and that way you start to get things going. And Woodcraft does own some wonderful campsites, not very many, but it does own some wonderful ones. But the relationship with the Scouts and other movements is perfectly good. And indeed, we've often used Scout campsites for Woodcraft camp. There is no problem there. We're all basically trying to make sure that young people get an opportunity to discover themselves, understand the natural world in which we live in, but above all, want to sustain the natural world that we live in. Woodcraft Folk have just done a fantastic job for almost 100 years. There for peace, there for democracy, there for the environment. What is there not to like about that?
I think that's a fantastic end to the discussion. Thank you, Jeremy. And
can I give you one last anecdote?
Sure.
During my leadership campaign, 2015, my team were quite often frequently annoyed with me because of what they believed to be a different sense of priorities between me and them. And one Saturday afternoon, they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Sydenham Woods in South London to cut a cake for the 75th anniversary of London Woodcraft." They said, "You're doing what?" So I had to educate them all into the ways of Woodcraft, and we went down to that camp, and I duly cut the cake with them. And to me, it was important to give a message out saying, we're into this campaign for everybody, for the future of those young people. And I was proud to do that.